My daughter married a serial criminal, and it almost cost us our entire fortune. But you won't believe it. We were saved by a cheap souvenir in the form of the Eiffel Tower. I never thought a story like this could happen to my family. We live in Omaha, Nebraska. I've worked 35 years as construction foreman. My wife has been a school librarian her whole life, and we've raised our daughters to believe in honesty and hard work. We don't live in luxury, but we always had enough. Enough to buy a small house, take family road trips, and celebrate birthdays together. My eldest daughter, Sarah, was the responsible one. She studied nursing, had a good head on her shoulders, and worked long hours in the local hospital. My younger daughter, Emma, was more free-spirited, always chasing dreams and stories. Both of them deserved the world. So when Sarah told us she was engaged, we believed she had finally found someone who could match her values. His name was Daniel Harris. He was originally from Kansas City, Missouri, and said he worked in finance, though the details were always vague. He was charming in that polished, city-slicker way, nice suits, the right words, and the kind of smile that made people trust him instantly. I'll admit it, I wanted to believe him too. We thought he was ambitious, maybe even a little too ambitious, but Sarah seemed happy. That was all that mattered. The wedding was beautiful, the kind we could barely afford but decided to go through with anyway. Between our savings and a $40,000 joint loan split half and half between the couple, everything looked perfect. The venue alone cost $20,000, with catering at $15,000, live music for $7,000, and decorations and photography adding another $10,000. My wife and I told ourselves it was worth it. This was our daughter's dream day. Daniel's family came in from Missouri, ordinary folks who seemed supportive but kept to themselves. They didn't seem wealthy, just middle-class people like us. No red flags, no strange behavior. It all looked like the perfect union of two families. After the wedding, Sarah and Daniel flew to Paris for their honeymoon. That's where everything began to unravel. It wasn't the Eiffel Tower or the fancy hotels that gave him away. It was a cheap little souvenir. Sarah told us later, with tears in her eyes, how she had tried to buy a miniature Eiffel Tower keychain from a street vendor. Just a trinket, maybe 10 euros. She swiped Daniel's card, and it was declined. She tried again. Declined. Finally, she had to pay with her own card. She laughed it off in the moment, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. When she came back home, she didn't tell us at first. She wanted to believe it was just a mistake, maybe a frozen card or a bank glitch. But within a few weeks, the cracks widened. Daniel didn't go back to work. He never really had a job to begin with. He spent his days at home, claiming he was between deals and that the market was rough. Bills started piling up. He avoided questions. And then came the first payment notice for the wedding loan. Sarah paid her half immediately. Daniel? Nothing. Excuses. Promises. Next week. Just waiting on a transfer. I could see the fear growing in my daughter's eyes, even when she tried to hide it at Sunday dinners. She was already beginning to doubt the man she had married, though she still hoped she was wrong. What she discovered next nearly destroyed us all. Sarah tried to hold herself together. She didn't want to call me or her mother in tears right after her honeymoon. She wanted to believe she had chosen right, that Daniel was simply stressed, maybe adjusting to married life. But the signs multiplied quickly. Within weeks of returning home, she noticed how Daniel never left the house in the morning. He wasn't getting dressed for work, wasn't answering calls from an office, wasn't sending emails from a business address. Instead, he lingered in front of the TV, browsing stock tickers on his phone as though watching numbers could pass for a career. When Sarah asked about his clients, he said they were confidential. When she pressed for names, he dodged. Trust me, he'd smile. These things take time. It wasn't just vague, it was empty. But Sarah's breaking point didn't come from his evasive answers. It came one Friday night at her cousin's birthday dinner. We were all gathered around the table. Daniel had had too much beer. His words slurred, his laugh louder than everyone else's. Later, when the family was busy with cake, Sarah told me she noticed his phone buzz. He had set it down carelessly, screen glowing, out of habit or maybe desperation. She glanced at it. The message preview was enough to freeze her blood. It was from one of his old friends. "Don't worry, man. They'll eat out of your hand. Her family looks loaded. By the time they figured out, you'll have the debts cleared and maybe even a new house." Sarah's heart pounded. She didn't say a word. She smiled through the rest of the night, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, something cracked. That weekend, when Daniel passed out on the couch, she crept to his study. She searched drawers, folders, anything she could find. His email inbox confirmed what the text hinted. Unpaid bills stacked high, default notices from credit card companies, even old court letters. He wasn't just careless. He was drowning. Sarah told me later that the next week was the hardest of her life. She woke up every morning beside a man she no longer trusted, sitting at breakfast with a stranger in her own kitchen. She carried her secret to work, to dinner, to phone calls with us. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the weight of fear pressing down. And yet she still hoped she was wrong. She still thought maybe there was an explanation. But then the first wedding loan bill arrived. It was due at the end of the month. Sarah paid her $20,000 share without hesitation. Daniel, however, offered excuses. "My account is tied up. The bank messed up my wire." Next week came and went. Nothing. The collectors didn't care about excuses. They cared about payments. And Sarah, terrified for her credit in her name, started paying double, her half and his. She used savings she had set aside for a down payment on a house. She skipped things she needed for herself. She carried the weight alone. I remember calling her one evening. Her voice sounded flat, distant. "Dad, do you think people can change?" she asked. I told her yes, sometimes they can, but she didn't sound convinced. Behind closed doors, she kept investigating. She knew his passwords by now. One night, while he slept, she scrolled through his messages again. There was another chat with his friend, confirming her worst fear. Her folks are soft. They'll cave. Just keep acting like the golden boy. Once they pay off the loan, we'll settle the rest of your mess. Easy. That was the moment, Sarah told me later, when her heart truly broke. He wasn't just irresponsible. He was calculating. He thought we were his safety net. He thought we were gullible enough to cover his past mistakes. The irony? By then, even the rest of our family had started noticing something was off. My wife whispered to me that she didn't like the way Daniel bragged at dinners. Emma, her younger sister, rolled her eyes at his stories that never added up. We didn't know the full truth, but we were beginning to feel it. Still, Sarah kept it to herself. She carried the burden in silence, too ashamed to admit what she had discovered. She didn't want us to think she had chosen wrong. She didn't want to face the humiliation. And then came the slip-up, the little detail that would unravel everything. The Eiffel Tower souvenir. Sarah had kept it in her purse, a reminder of the moment she first suspected. When Daniel noticed it one afternoon, he laughed. "That cheap thing? Why do you even keep it?" Because that cheap thing had told her the truth. Because without it, she might have still believed his lies. She didn't tell him that. Not yet. But the storm was coming, and none of us were ready for how big it would be. The bills piled higher, and with them Sarah's silence grew heavier. She told no one, not even Emma, who usually knew every detail of her life. My daughter carried her fear like an invisible backpack, smiling at work, nodding at family dinners, while inside she was unraveling. One evening, I noticed her hands trembling as she set down her coffee cup. "Are you okay?" I asked. She forced a smile. "Just tired." But I could tell she hadn't been sleeping. Daniel, meanwhile, acted as if nothing were wrong. He bragged about future deals he was working on, dropped vague hints about clients in California, and kept scrolling on his phone late into the night. He didn't know that Sarah was watching, that she had memorized the patterns of his lies. The breaking point came when the second loan payment was due. Once again, Sarah paid her share. Once again, Daniel offered excuses. This time, however, the collectors didn't stay quiet. Automated calls rang during dinner. Emails arrived with bold red subject lines. Payment overdue. And then something even stranger happened. Emma, my younger daughter, called me, her voice shaking. "Dad, my car lease got rejected," she said. "The dealer told me my credit report shows a huge loan in my name, but I never applied for anything." It hit me like a brick. How could Emma's credit be damaged? She was careful, had only just started building her history. Sarah overheard the call and went pale. That was the moment she realized Daniel's deception reached farther than she had dared to imagine. The connection wasn't clear yet, but the timing was undeniable. Emma's credit fell right as Sarah's loan mess escalated. It was all tangled together. Sarah finally broke down. She confessed everything to Emma one night in the kitchen. How she had seen the messages, how she had been paying Daniel's share, how she feared she had married a fraud. Emma's eyes filled with tears, then fury. "You can't keep living like this," she told her. "He's not just lying to you. He's hurting all of us." My wife overheard part of their conversation. When she told me, I didn't want to believe it. "Maybe it's just a mistake," I argued. "Maybe the bank mixed something up." It was easier to believe in paperwork errors than in betrayal, but the evidence kept mounting. Sarah discovered that Daniel had rerouted financial emails to a separate account, one she had never seen before. When she traced it, she realized all billing notifications were landing in a P.O. box registered under his name. It explained why physical letters never reached their house. He had built a wall around the truth. The facade finally cracked in the most unexpected way. A week later, Sarah received a call, not from a bank, but from the wedding coordinator. They were finalizing receipts for the event and wanted confirmed details. When the PDF arrived, Sarah's heart sank. The payer listed on the contract wasn't Daniel. It wasn't her either. It was Emma, her sister's name, her sister's email. Though the email was slightly altered, a fake variation Daniel had created. Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. He hadn't just used her family. He had stolen Emma's identity to bankroll his lies. She printed the contract and drove straight to our house. She spread the papers across our dining table, her hands shaking, her face pale. "Dad, Mom, look at this," she whispered. For a long time, no one spoke. My wife pressed her hand to her mouth. Emma swore under her breath. And I wanted to deny it, to say it couldn't be true. But the evidence was staring back at us in black and white. Daniel came home later that evening, cheerful and oblivious. He kissed Sarah on the cheek, dropped his keys, and poured himself a drink. We were all sitting in the living room, silent. He looked around, confused. "What's going on?" Sarah didn't answer. Not yet. She needed more proof. She needed something undeniable. And fate was about to hand it to her. Because just days later, the wedding videographer delivered the raw footage. Hours of uncut material, laughs, vows, dancing, speeches. Sarah thought it would be a sweet memory. Instead, it became the final nail in the coffin. While reviewing clips late at night, Daniel dozed off beside her. Sarah pressed play on a sequence she hadn't noticed before. Emma standing near the dance floor, speaking to a friend. The videographer had been close, his microphone catching their voices. Emma's words cut through the music like a knife. "It's not right. He's a fraud. He's using her. They're going to regret this." Sarah froze. Her sister had seen it all, even before she admitted it. The truth was right there, hidden in the background of their happiest day. And if a camera had captured that, what else might it have captured? The courthouse in Wichita felt colder than December wind. We stood on the steps that morning, Sarah clutching her coat as if it were armor. She didn't speak, but her silence carried a weight that none of us could lift. My wife's hand trembled in mine. For months we had whispered behind doors, wondered how deep this nightmare went. But that day it stopped being a private family tragedy. It became a matter of record. Inside, the prosecutor's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe Sarah Miller may not be just a victim, but a knowing participant in the fraudulent scheme perpetrated by Daniel Cross." The words landed like a hammer. I heard my wife's gasp echo through the chamber. Sarah's eyes widened, then dropped to the table as if staring at her folded hands might erase the accusation. For a moment, even I faltered. Could my daughter have known? Could love blind someone so fully that silence became complicity? The prosecutor laid out their version. The credit applications in Sarah's name, signed electronically from her own devices, the lavish spending linked to accounts she should have seen. They painted her as naive at best, dishonest at worst. Every photo of the wedding, the Rolls Royce, the fireworks, the private DJ, flashed on the overhead screen, as if they were evidence of guilt. Each image twisted the knife. My wife whispered, "They think she sold us out." Her voice cracked, more broken than I had ever heard it. Then Sarah's attorney rose. Calm, deliberate, he adjusted his glasses and began dismantling the picture. These signatures, Your Honor, were digitally inserted. The IP logs traced not to Sarah's devices at home, but to the Wi-Fi of the hotel where Daniel Cross was staying weeks before the wedding. The so-called secondary addresses, P.O. boxes and rented mail drops, all under his control. And here, he held up printed chat logs. This is Daniel himself, messaging his partners about how the idiots will never know until the bank calls. The room shifted. People who had just looked at Sarah with suspicion now glanced toward the absent groom, whose chair sat empty, the man himself locked in a county facility. Still, the prosecutor pressed harder. Even if she didn't forge documents, she benefited from them. She enjoyed the venue, the catering, the entertainment, all of it funded by fraud. How do we separate complicity from convenience? That was a knife's twist. Intent. Could a bride simply walk through her wedding blind to machinery beneath it? The judge leaned forward, her face unreadable. After a pause that felt like an eternity, she delivered a line that kept us hanging on the edge. At this time, Sarah Miller is not a defendant. She will remain classified as a witness and potential victim. However, the court acknowledges ongoing investigation. Should new evidence arise, her status may change. The gavel struck. The words should have brought relief, but they didn't. We left the courthouse no lighter than we had entered. The air outside was bright, but Sarah's shoulders stayed bent, as though she carried the whole sky. My wife walked in silence, her tears staining her scarf. People on the steps looked at us, some with pity, some with doubt. I wanted to shout that my daughter was innocent, that she had been deceived like all of us. But the truth was less certain than hope. For now, she was free, but only barely. The road ahead promised no guarantees. That night, alone at the kitchen table, I stared at the Eiffel Tower souvenir still sitting by the window. The little trinket that had exposed Daniel's empty card in Paris felt almost mocking now. It had saved us once. I could only pray it would not be the last thread holding our family together. The walls of our house seemed to breathe with tension those weeks. Every knock at the door sent a shiver through me. Every unknown number on the caller ID made Sarah pale. She lived suspended between two identities, victim and suspect, and until the court decided which one, her life was trapped in limbo. The investigators returned, this time with digital forensics. They pulled Daniel's emails, chat logs, even archive data from cloud backups he thought were deleted. The evidence was staggering. Threads with his so-called business partners laid out in ugly detail how they rotated identities, opened credit lines, staged elaborate weddings, and disappeared once the vendors and families were too tangled to escape. Kansas down, next stop Missouri. One message read. Another, uglier one. Her family's too desperate to say no. They'll cover everything. Then we move on. Reading that nearly broke me. I realized it wasn't just about Sarah anymore. This was a pattern, a machine, a traveling circus of manipulation, feeding off hope and vanity. The prosecutors had the same realization. With enough evidence linking Daniel to two prior weddings across state lines, the charges escalated from fraud to organized criminal conspiracy. That shift saved my daughter's life. Because in parallel, the forensic experts had traced the IP logins on every disputed contract and credit application. One by one, the logins lined up with Daniel's devices. Hotel Wi-Fi in Kansas City, cafe hotspots in Denver, and finally, the banquet hall where Sarah's wedding had taken place. The hammer dropped when the wedding coordinator turned over the original signed contract. There it was in black and white. Sarah's sister's name as responsible payer, a temporary email belonging to Daniel, and his electronic signature embedded in the metadata. There was no arguing with digital fingerprints. When Sarah's lawyer presented this in court, the prosecutor's tone shifted. Where once she'd been pressed as a potential accomplice, now she was reframed as a victim. Still, it wasn't instant relief. For days after, the community whispered. Co-workers avoided her. Even old friends hesitated to send a simple text. Reputation bleeds slower than truth heals. The trial loomed, each pre-hearing bringing more revelations. The vendors submitted their invoices. $45,000 for the venue, $38,000 catering, $15,000 for photography, $12,000 for band, all unpaid, all chasing Sarah because her name was on part of the paperwork. She lived in fear of collections, of ruined credit, of waking up tomorrow to another certified letter stamped in red. But the turning point came late one evening when the lead investigator called. "We've completed the analysis of Daniel's devices," he said. "Sarah, you're cleared. Every application was spoofed from his accounts. Your role is victim only." I'll never forget her face in that moment. Relief and devastation all at once. Tears came, not of joy, but of release, as though the weight of months finally broke through her armor. My wife pulled her into her arms. I stood close, watching my daughter collapse into the safety of being believed. Still, the victory was tempered. Daniel, even in custody, played his old game. "This is a mistake. Banks mess up all the time," he said, gaslighting anyone who'd listen. But the mountain of evidence no longer bent to his narrative. Witnesses, paper trails, phone data, all stacked into a wall that even his arrogance couldn't scale. It was clear. The man my daughter had married was no husband. He was a serial criminal, part of a gang that lived off the ashes of broken families. And Sarah, my Sarah, had nearly been destroyed in the process. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Rows of strangers shuffled on the benches, waiting for a case they didn't know, but already judged by whispers. Sarah sat between her lawyer and my wife, pale but steady, eyes fixed on the polished oak desk where Daniel would soon appear. He entered with that same grin I remember from the wedding, the grin that once charmed us into lowering our guard. Only now, in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, the charm curdled into arrogance. He still thought he could talk his way out. The prosecutor began with precision, exhibit after exhibit, emails, contracts, invoices, bank statements. Then came the piece de resistance, the Eiffel Tower souvenir receipt. That tiny failed purchase, declined at a gift shop in Paris, triggered the first red flag. The jury chuckled at the absurdity of it. How something so small unraveled something so enormous. But to me it felt sacred, proof that even chance can save a family. Sarah was called to testify. My heart clenched as she raised her hand, swore the oath, and faced the courtroom. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied. She told the story not as a victim begging for pity, but as a woman reclaiming her truth. "I believed in him," she said. "I thought we were building a life together. But to him, I was never a wife. I was an asset, a pawn in a scheme." The room went silent. Daniel's lawyer tried to twist it. "Wasn't it convenient," he pressed, "that the loans and contracts appear in your name? Didn't you enjoy the benefits of a lavish wedding?" Sarah didn't flinch. "Enjoy," she said. "I'm still paying the emotional cost of a night I didn't choose." The jury watched closely. Their faces hardened each time Daniel smirked or whispered to his attorney. His arrogance, once his weapon, became his undoing. After days of testimony, the verdict came guilty. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. The foreman's words felt like thunder rolling across the room. 7 years in federal prison. That was the sentence. Not as long as I wished, but enough to strip away the mask he'd worn too easily. Enough to stop him, at least for now, from finding another family to bleed. But the story didn't end with him. It never does. The judge turned to Sarah. "You will be compensated for damages, both the wedding expenses and a sum for emotional distress." The figure wasn't just numbers on a page. It was validation, a legal recognition that she was not at fault. I remember Sarah exhaling, like she'd been holding her breath for a year. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were different. not the tears of fear or humiliation. These were tears of release, of dignity restored. Walking out of that courthouse, the sunlight felt warmer. Reporters clustered near the steps, microphones outstretched. But Sarah ignored them. She wasn't a headline. She was free. In the weeks that followed, life slowly rebuilt itself. Banks corrected her credit report. Vendors withdrew their claims, and her name began to heal. She moved into a small apartment of her own, decorating it not with lavish ornaments, but with simple things. A plant on the windowsill, a second-hand couch, and yes, one little Eiffel Tower figurine, this time bought with her own money. We visited often, and every time I saw a little more of my daughter return. The laughter, the stubbornness, the spark that had dimmed under months of suspicion. One evening, as we sat together drinking coffee, she looked at me and said, "Dad, I thought this would break me, but maybe it built me instead." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, so I just reached for her hand. And I realized we hadn't just survived a criminal. We had survived the shattering of trust, the collapse of illusions, the near ruin of everything we'd worked for. We were still here, together. Daniel lost his freedom. Sarah regained her life. And in the end, that balance felt just.
Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city you are from.